Okay, hi again. I'm back again to talk about an episode of American history. Last time we talked about the stock market crash that was the trigger event that led to the Great Depression. And I said then, it says right here, that the stock market crash was the event that caused the Depression to happen when it did, how it did, but was not one of the basic root causes of this 10-year long economic crisis in the United States and around the world. There were other more basic causes of the Depression. What were they? Okay, so let's take a look at what they were. There are 5 of them. The first one, and the most important, is the uneven distribution of income. You may, today, hear your parents or hear on some sort of news feed about the 1% and the 99%. And the point being made there is that a small minority of the population has a vast majority of the wealth of the nation. And the bottom most of the nation has less. So when wealth is concentrated into a few, it means that the purchasing power of the many is decreased a little bit. And that was shown in those days by everybody buying everything they could buy on credit. If we think of it in a very micro way, a billionaire might have 15 cars or 20 cars, but there might be thousands of people, especially in the 1920s, who could not afford any car. It would be better to have thousands of people have one car than a millionaire have 15 or 20 in terms of car sales, and etc. People who buy yachts tend to be in the minority, and they can only buy so many yachts. People who buy smaller things will buy them each and every day if they can. Again, okay, most Americans did not earn enough money to buy all the goods that were produced. There was an overproduction in terms of what people could buy. This was masked by the easy credit of the 1920s. People did go out and buy, I want a refrigerator, I want a washer, I want a radio, I want a big ticket item. The Model T Ford is passé, the Model A Ford I understand is about to come out, I'd like to get one of those. Sort of mentality. But after the stock market crash, remember, credit dried up. Productivity, manufacturing output, rose 32% in the 1920s. Wages rose 8%. The working person worked hard for their money. Remember, the highly paid Ford workers made $5 a day, or about $23,000 a year in 2020 dollars. So, in other words, not that much. Between 1919 and 1929, the share of the income of the wealthiest 1% rose from 12% to 20% of the total. 1%. But the bottom top had much more than that, and the bottom half had much less than that. 56% of Americans earned less than $2,500 a year, including those $5 a day guys with Ford. Obviously. I think it was $1,500 or $1,600 in those dollars. There it is right there, 16. Therefore, the installment plan was invented to cater to the fact that people had some money but not enough to buy the things that were being produced, that they themselves were producing. And I keep talking about washers and refrigerators, but electric irons instead of those big heavy metal sad irons that would create Popeye arms if you actually used them. Vacuum cleaners to clean your house was a chore, but not the same chore as cleaning the house without the vacuum cleaner. All these things were things that people wanted. Electric fans to move, in the days before air conditioning, to move the air around and create a breeze in the hot summer. Those kinds of things are wanted. People want to buy all of those things and they can't necessarily afford them. Many Americans, therefore, were overextended. They owed so much money. Paying off existing debt kept them from making new payments on new products, because they were deeply in debt paying off the stuff they'd already purchased. Therefore, even before the crash, sales had begun to decrease a little bit because consumers couldn't consume, or they couldn't carry out what you have to do in economic terms to consume something. They couldn't demand it anymore. I'd like to get a new such and such. Yeah, so would I, but we still have to pay off the so-and-so type of problem. After the crash, there was no more credit anyway. And so even if you thought you were able to buy the new such and such, you couldn't get it on the friendly buy now, pay later. As that happened after the crash, the fact that there was a little bit of a lull in consumption anyway, and now it was stopped because of the no credit, no easy credit, manufacturers cut production and began to lay off workers. The workers who were going paycheck to paycheck now didn't have a paycheck in some cases. In many cases, no income at all. The layoffs had a chain reaction. For example, slumping auto sales, car sales, meant that there were layoffs in the auto industry. But it also meant that by not making cars, cutting back on the making of cars, they were using less steel, less automotive glass, less rubber, less petroleum products. All of those things were also cut back, and there was a ripple effect of layoffs in all those related industries. You must understand that there was no unemployment in those days. Today, when you lose your job, and many people lost jobs because of COVID in this past year, and there were programs set up to even bolster unemployment insurance because of the COVID, and so that people could get by, or had a chance to be able to get by. But there was no social safety net, as it's called, in those days, so that when you lost your job and were laid off, you went from having an income to having no income whatsoever. Those people immediately lost things they had to make payments on, were repossessed, and they sometimes lost their houses if they couldn't make a mortgage payment, and they certainly lost their house if they couldn't, their residence, wherever it was, if they couldn't pay the rent. 2, the loss of export sales. Loss of export sales. We can't sell things to Americans. Can we sell them to the English, the French, whoever? Loss of export sales. Congress had passed a series of high tariffs. The Fordney-McCumber tariff was the highest tariff in American history, passed in 1929, I think. But it was replaced the next year. Maybe the tariff was 1928. But in any case, in 1930, the highest tariff, even higher, was the Hawley-Smoot tariff. Now, tariffs, as you know, raise prices on imports. It stops imports. But those countries that would import something to your country and sell it there, and therefore companies in their country would make a profit, now don't feel like they want to necessarily buy from your exports. And so stopping imports also causes other countries to roadblock our exports to them. In theory, to protect U.S. businesses, it actually hurt by virtually cutting off U.S. exports, is the textbook way to say that. Companies in other nations unable to export to the United States, the countries didn't have any desire to now be customers of the United States. They already owed us money, those countries did. It would be in our best interest for their economies to flourish so they could pay their debts. But we set up this blockade, and it was a double-edged sword. Loss of export sales, number 2. Here's our diagram again. The collapse of this European economy and this system of reparations, war debt payments, and investments made by U.S. banks to German get back on your feet after the war efforts. Remember, U.S. investment in Germany was the only arrow here that is being done voluntarily. The Treaty of Versailles says Germany must pay reparations. The debts that these countries ran up with U.S. banks and U.S. corporations said that they had to pay their debt off. The banks were investing, using money to invest in a good business that could help Germany but also help those banks. Well, we know what happened to the banks. They're in a disarray, right? And in fact, this has been going on for a couple of years now, because as the US banks spend more and more and more of their investment dollars on the stock market in New York City, they're spending less and less of it in ventures in Germany. In fact, this comes to be a trickle. And once again, Germany is unable to pay reparations. Now what do we do? Now what do we do? There's yet a second attempt to get Germany back on its feet. Another banker by the name of Owen Young is sent to, again, try to bolster this, put a patch on this, so Germany is able to pay. And in fact, he does come up with a plan. But it's not enough, and after an attempt, a good faith attempt to continue to pay, Germany collapses and is unable to pay. Mistakes made by the Federal Reserve Bank, the decentralized central bank of the United States that we have. We've already talked about this. This is a fundamental thing, and it lasts for many years into the Depression. Interest rates were low in the 1920s. The Federal Reserve controls the Federal Reserve rate, which controls interest. Higher interest in the 20s could have stopped all the wild speculation and the buying on credit, but it didn't. But once the crash hit, the Fed finally did raise interest rates, making it harder and harder throughout much of the Depression for any kind of loans to be made at all, and made recovery even more difficult. So those are four, and you should all be able to pencil in the last one, because we've been talking about it throughout the entire 1920s, the quiet depression of the 1920s that had been overshadowed by all the great success of automobiles and radios, which is the depressed farm economy. The farming economy had been depressed ever since Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918, never recovered from the overproduction, the increased amount of overproduction in farm goods produced by American farmers because of the needs of wartime. The war's over, those needs go away, and there is a tremendous surplus of farm goods that can't be sold. Depression all these years of the American farmer. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the causes of the Great Depression. We will talk another time about how this played out on American cities, towns, and villages. But for right now, you should know those 5 causes, the underlying causes of the Great Depression, and be able to differentiate those base causes from the stock market crash. All right. Until next time, have a great day.